Everything that Cyberpunk 2077 got right with its 2.0 update is everything wrong with Starfield. Now, before everybody gets their panties in a bunch, here's the deal, okay? I don't have anything against Xbox. I have nothing against Bethesda. I could care less that Bethesda was acquired by Microsoft and Xbox. I could care less that the Activision deal is going to go through. I'm a diehard PlayStation fan. I've been a PlayStation fan since PlayStation 1, Metal Gear Solid. That's the game that got me into gaming. And honestly, besides being a huge fan of Sony's PlayStation, I'm just a fan of good video games in general. It doesn't really matter what platform you're on. So that out of the way, let's get into the nitty-gritty here. What is it that Cyberpunk 2077 got so right with this 2.0 update that made me realize how awfully painfully bad my experience was with Starfield up until the 13th hour of gameplay? And in order for you to understand that, we got to talk about it. I got to tell you a little story. Okay, so the game was about to come out, Starfield, that is, all right? It was about to come out, and I was on the verge of going on a 2-week vacation across the ocean on the other side of the world. So I resubscribed to Game Pass on PC, and I paid for the deluxe edition upgrade on Game Pass so that I could get early access to Starfield and play a couple of hours before I went on my trip. And that is exactly what I did. And in those couple of hours that I got to play the game, I had an overall okay time. It had a lot to do with the fact that I was overly hyped for the game, but now looking back on it, there was not anything really truly special about those few hours of the game. But I thought to myself, no big deal. I'm going to go on my trip. I'm going to come back in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to go ahead and keep playing the game. So 2 weeks pass by. I'm on a 13-hour flight back home, and all I can think of at the time is playing more Starfield. And that is exactly what happened. I got here Friday night, Saturday and Sunday. I had the house all to myself, ladies and gents, and all I did for those 2 entire days was play Starfield. I clocked in about maybe 15 to 16 hours in those 2 days alone. And here is what ultimately happened. It took 13 hours before Starfield finally became interesting. The main quest line and all the quests that I had done up until the 13th hour were lackluster, to say the best. The gameplay is excellently done, but ultimately all it is you're grabbing a gun and you're shooting. I know that you get some powers later on, but if it takes 13 hours, okay, and I understand that everybody's experience is different, and that it may take you less time, it may take you more time to get to a point where you have different powers or different abilities, different quest lines available to you. I totally understand that. I understand how this game works. I understand what the premise of the game is. I understand what the game has to offer and what it doesn't offer, okay? But in my experience, which is the only thing I can speak to, is that it took 13 hours for the game to even become interesting. But I'm like, okay, look, I'm at a great quest line. I joined the Crimson Fleet. I'm having a blast playing through that quest line. This is amazing. I'm going to keep playing the game. But then the 2.0 update for Cyberpunk dropped, and I haven't touched the game since. And I think it's really important that we understand what this update did that took me away from Starfield rather easily. So one of the things that CDPR recommended for anybody that was going to be playing Cyberpunk again with the 2.0 update and or Phantom Liberty is that they recommended you just start off with a whole new character. Restart the game from scratch because they changed all the systems. They changed the leveling system, they changed the skill trees, they changed how your stats off of your clothes now no longer are on your clothes, but instead they are on your cyberware. They changed a whole bunch. And so they said, hey guys, gals, we highly recommend that if you're going to play the game again now with this new update, play it from scratch with a new character. And that is exactly what I did. I installed the update, I installed the game, and I made a character and started off. Both games, Starfield and Cyberpunk, you get to create your characters, you decide how they look, you decide what points you want to invest into what skill trees or what point or abilities and whatnot, and then you pick some background information for them both. And this is where things already start off being very, very vastly different. In Starfield, you pick your background, and your background choices are going to have impact on things like dialogue and certain events that can happen throughout the course of the game. But in Cyberpunk, you pick your background, which is one of 3, right? You got Corpo, Nomad, and Street Kid. You pick one of those 3, and you immediately play your background. All right, now all 3 backgrounds start off very differently, but within like an hour, hour and a half, maybe 2 hours max, more like an hour and a half. Within an hour and a half, all 3 backgrounds paths converge into what is the main story for Cyberpunk 2077. So we'll put it in at like 2 hours, okay? Just worst case scenario, it takes you 2 hours to get through the opening of the game, which is specifically the opening portion where you play out your background that you picked. After those 2 hours, you exit your apartment, you go meet Jackie, and he tells you about how he's got a job from Dexter Deshawn, and that is what's going to catapult the main quest line and the main story and start it off, right? At that point, you're able to start exploring Night City and get yourself involved with side quests, side activities, gigs, cybercycle hunts, etc. You can literally go out there and just have fun, okay? Now in Starfield, after you do the first couple of missions where you get the frontier ship and you go introduce yourself to Constellation, after at about that point, which I want to say was about the same amount of time, about 2 or 3 hours, you're able to start going exploring planets and stuff like that too, right? But here's the thing. You don't know anything yet. You don't know what planets are in what systems, and you don't know what's going on in those planets. And because a lot of these planets have procedurally generated content in them, you run the risk of landing on a planet to explore, because that's what the game's about, it's about exploration, and there being a whole lot of nothing there. And sometimes you'll go land on a planet and there's something. There is a mining outpost, there is a research facility, there are creatures, there are survivors, people that need your help escorting them to safety for you to then ultimately turn around and blast them in the back with a shotgun, right? There's a lot going on in Starfield 2, but the experiences are so far in between one another that it makes it feel like there is a whole lot of nothing going on. So in those 13 hours that it took for Starfield to get interesting in Cyberpunk, I had already done tons of side quests and side activities and side missions along with a whole lot of the main story. There's so much going on and so much to do, but it never feels overwhelming like it would be in a game like Assassin's Creed Odyssey or Valhalla, for example, or even Origins, right? Those games are like overly saturated with things to do. I think Cyberpunk got it right with a healthy amount of stuff to do to help you stay engaged with the game while also being able to move the story along at a very healthy pace. And this is one area where Cyberpunk absolutely destroys Starfield, because not only does it have excellent pacing, an excellent variety of things to do at a very good rate of time, if that makes any sense, the story itself, the main story itself, is excellently well written. It's very, very interesting. It's dramatic, to say the least, and it just keeps you engaged, or at least it kept me engaged from the moment it started, the first time I played through, and again this second run through of the game. And to be very honest with you, when I was playing through the main quest line in Starfield for those first 13 hours before I found the Crimson Fleet side quest line, I was just playing through the main quest line because I had to. Because I knew for a fact that if I played through the main quest line, eventually I would get to a point where I would come onto something interesting. I would find something interesting worth exploring and digging into. The actual story itself, from what I got from the game, was the most uninteresting thing I've played through in a very, very long time. I could care less about the artifacts, what they mean, what they do, what they're supposed to do. And I know, because I've read, that it gets interesting after many hours and that the main story actually ends up paying off. And I get that, but Jesus Christ, dude, 13 hours, damn near a full-length game before the game even gets interesting. That's inexcusable, if you ask me. But it's not just the story, it's also the gameplay. At the core of it all, Starfield is just a shooter. That's all it is. You pick up a gun, you aim, you shoot, you kill, you get XP, yada, 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 you're done, rinse and repeat, and that's the game. I understand and I know that you unlock some sort of powers at some point into the main storyline. I never got that far because, once again, the game was just not that interesting to convince me to commit to playing this game to that point. Cyberpunk 2077, on the other hand, yes, it is also a first-person shooter, but there are a variety of ways, not a whole lot, but there's a variety of ways, and there's a couple of other things that you can sprinkle into the mix to make the gameplay interesting. The first time I played the game, I was a sneak shooter, which is what I traditionally do in every Fallout game. If you know, you know. All right. This time, with the updates and with the changes to the skill trees, I ended up going with cool and reflexes. And long story short, that means that I have a katana, a throwing knife, and a silenced handgun. I have been having an absolute blast playing this game. Not to mention that on top of the melee combat and the shooting, you've also got the net running, the hacking, and all the little hacks that you can do for status effects and damages and controlling cameras and turning cameras off and turning turrets against the enemies and stuff like that. This game has enough to offer with its gameplay variety to keep things interesting, not just with story, okay? But it also does a fantastic job of keeping gameplay interesting. I got to a point with Starfield where I'm like, okay, like I'm just gonna shoot. Like that's all this game has to really offer. There's really nothing else. Oh my God, I'm in a casino with zero gravity and we're just floating through the air and I shoot my shotgun at a guy and I just, you know, get propelled backwards a little bit. That's so freaking cool. Which it is. I mean, it was cool to see it happen, but come on, dude. You play Cyberpunk and you turn on, I'm gonna butcher the word by the way, you turn on Sandevistan, I'm gonna call it Sandy. Use the Sandy Cyberware operating system pack where it slows down time, and you start chunking knives at people, slicing them up with katanas, and then everybody comes, you know, time comes back to normal. You got a couple of stragglers, you execute them. It just has such a great flow to gameplay now that I wonder if it even had it to begin with. I have no idea because I went with a very cookie cutter, shoot 'em up kind of gameplay style the first time I played the game. But this time around, I am absolutely loving how this game plays. But at the end of it all, I don't think that Starfield's shortcomings are Bethesda's fault by any means. I don't think that obviously they didn't intentionally make the game uninteresting. And obviously that's just a personal opinion too. I don't speak for the masses. I don't speak for everyone out there. This is just my opinion. I don't think the game is interesting, but I also don't think that the game was made that way. I think the game's uninteresting nature is a direct product of the way that the game was designed. This is a open world space exploration game with 1,000 or more planets to explore. It could not have been any other way. This was bound to happen. This was going to happen. And it is exactly what happened. This was my first initial thought when the game was first announced to have this much in regards to planets was, oh my God, that's still too much. No Man's Sky, quintillion planets, obviously way too much. 1,000 planets is still a bit too much. I think if they would have just kept it to like 100, 150 maybe, I think we'd be telling a much different story right now. But they didn't do that. They went with 1,000 or more, and this is exactly what we got. We got a whole lot of procedurally generated planets and content that is mildly entertaining and mildly interesting. And yes, it is still fun. I don't think Starfield is not a fun game. I don't think Starfield was a bad game per se. When we look at Cyberpunk 2077 and what they've done to the game, it's incredible. Now, of course, Cyberpunk came out atrociously, and they've put in a lot of work to get the game to this point. But here's where the biggest differences are. You have 1,000+ planets and moons to explore in one game versus one singular landmass of a city in another game. Naturally, there's going to be very stark differences between the two in this as to how much is presented at what pace to the player. And I think that the only way Starfield would have been able to make things better and or more interesting is by giving us a more interesting story to begin with. Because if there's going to be that much time between finding something interesting while exploring all these other planets, then you've got to make the story itself engaging and entertaining and interesting. If you drop the ball there, especially for as quickly and as early into the game as Starfield did, then the rest of it is pretty much equally uninteresting and equally unengaging. And Cyberpunk 2077 does it completely differently. It is incredibly engaging and incredibly entertaining and incredibly interesting from the get-go. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for hanging out with me this long. This was a little longer than I wanted it to be, but it is what it is. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments below what you think. All right, you can disagree with me, you can agree with me. I want to know exactly what your thoughts are on this comparison, what your thoughts are on Starfield, what are your thoughts on Cyberpunk 2077 and its roadmap to 2.0 and 2.0 itself. I hope you'll have a wonderful day. Be good to yourselves, be good to one another. Peace out.